And you can find us on lovedoesn'thurtinc.org. And we are a nonprofit that works to end teenage dating violence. We go into schools and educate and empower students about teen dating violence, how to prevent it, how to get out of it if they're in it. I've been doing that. I started about 4 years ago. I was a former high school counselor. I did that for about 11 years. I really enjoy working with teens. I also have a small business. It's called Grace's Love Designs. And I create guided journals for people to process trauma, to process grief, things like that. And I myself am a survivor of being sexually assaulted at the age of 12 while in school. And then unfortunately in high school, I did get into a dating relationship that was very physically violent and emotionally abusive as well. So that's kind of my background and kind of guided me to what I'm doing today, the nonprofit.
Well, thank you first and foremost for sharing. I know in my research and in my anecdotal experiences, and some of the men and women that I work with, they also share that a lot of their sexual trauma does happen within school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that is because maybe the children or the people, while they're growing up and their bodies are changing and there's hormones and there's puberty, there isn't an outlet for them to express themselves in a healthy way. As a counselor now, did you see maybe that being a factor when you had these incidences within the school where education would have been helpful for those who needed it versus those who were just maybe who had the bad behaviors, they needed guidance in another way?
Yeah. I mean, when I was a high school counselor, it was constant. Um, Issues with students doing inappropriate things, touching other students inappropriately, happened in class, which is, it's wild to think about that, but it is happening in class, in the hallways. Um, yeah, I think it would have been extremely helpful to have some more education that we can talk about this. It is a very uncomfortable discussion to have. But I think as the adults, that's our job, is to have those uncomfortable conversations because it's going to help these teens. And also kind of allowing those who have been victims to come forward in an environment that feels safe, right? If no one ever talks about it, well, certainly I'm not going to be the one to go talk about it when I'm 13, 14 years old, right? So yeah, I couldn't tell you how many over 11 years, just a lot of cases of sexual assault while in school happening that would, and that was just what was reported to me, right? How many more were not reported?
Yes, I've if I look back on my high school, I wasn't aware of it in elementary school, which like grade 8 and younger, so that's what like 13 and younger. But once I got to like the high school level, like 14, like let's say age 14 to 18, that's where I became aware of it because people would share, and some of the stories that they would tell me, it sounded horrifying, at least hearing it. But the way that it was told to me, I was more bothered by it than the person who was sharing it or the maybe the group of people that were discussing it. Do you find sometimes that there seems to be like a minimizing of the impact that the victim is going through, and the people who are listening, they're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you went through that." Where they're like, "Yeah, it was kind of bad, but you know, it just is what it is."
Yes, on both sides. Yes, I think there's minimizing on the side of the person who did it. And it was okay. I barely touched this person or whatnot. Um, and then even on the victim side, I think there is minimizing of, it's okay, this thing's happen. And I don't want to tell anybody. That happens very often. And it very much bothers me, both sides. But when I go into the schools, something that I do tell them about my own experience. And something that I always say to them is, if you hear nothing else today than what I say, please hear this. Keep your hands to yourself. keep them to yourself, because that moment that you have decided to touch somebody else without their permission then changes that person's life forever. And you may move on without a second thought, right? I am 42 years old. I remember that moment like it was yesterday. So I'm trying to get them to understand the impact that they have on other people in a split second decision, possibly, they may not plan it. But that really changes someone's life. And so yeah, I see people just saying, oh, it's not a big deal, this and that, but it is a big deal. You don't have to be touched if you don't want to be touched.
Yeah, and I always found, because I haven't experienced it myself, but it's been shared to me. And when I ask the person or the people that I've shared it, that's exactly what they do. They minimize it. And sometimes I look at it as, then you catch yourself, right? Like, okay, I'm feeling this, but if they don't feel this, is it really not a big deal? Like now you're beginning to
Yes,
question your
right.
own sanity, right? Because they're like, well, at least in my experience, it came across as it's something that just happens. Whereas me, because I'm not exposed to that and it's something that I haven't done, it's like, no, it isn't something. Yeah, it does happen. Like crime does happen. Like bad things does happen, right? But it's not something that should be like, okay, I was sexually abused. What's for dinner tomorrow? Like,
Right,
right? Like,
right.
like, right. So when you went through what you went through at such a young age, you mentioned 12. Like, how did you process what was going on at that time, and how do you process it now in hindsight?
So I think at the time I didn't process. I mean, I just shock, to be perfectly honest. It was between classes, and I was in seventh grade. So it happened, and I can remember the feeling that I got from my stomach, just a flush of emotion of like, what just happened? Why did he do that? And I didn't know what else to do, so I walked to my science class and I sat down and I sat there and I didn't do anything. I don't think I processed it. It felt so wrong and bad. I was way too scared to ever go and tell somebody. Um, I don't know if it was because I thought they wouldn't believe me, or if it wasn't a big deal and I was overreacting, that kind of thing. Or I just didn't know what to do. Um, I will say I never, ever verbally said I was sexually assaulted until I was 37 years old. So I spent 25 years just holding that, and not processing it at all until I remember there was a Supreme Court judge that had a hearing, and he had someone saying that he sexually assaulted her. And I remember people talking about her and saying she has to be lying because no one keeps a secret that long. No one could keep a secret like that for 25, 30 years. And I remember sitting there thinking, they can, because I am. And that actually was what helped get me into a counselor's office. I couldn't verbalize it to my husband. I had never told anybody, and she was the first person I told. Um, and so that took a long time for me to process through that. A lot of different therapies to help me process through that experience. Um, and I will say it's difficult, but it's much better than my reactions were before. But I think as survivors, we also have to realize that as we age, like I have a 13-year-old daughter. Um, the age of 12 for me was very hard for her when she turned 12, right? It was very triggering for me. I just kept thinking, please let me get her to 13 without someone touching her, right? Those are hard things to process through. Um, but you put in the work, and that's what I do. And every time I go into the counselor's office, we put in the work to help process these things and work through them. That it wasn't my fault. I did not cause it to happen. Um, it should never have happened. those kind of things. So yeah, I mean, as a child, I didn't process it. I didn't know what to do. So as an adult, I've done that work, which is I continue to do that work every single day.
There's two people I spoke to. One was assaulted when they were a child by a family member, and another one was assaulted later on in their adulthood at a work event. No, sorry, at a school event, but it was like university, so they're in their adulthood.
Okay.
And in both situations, when the person who was younger, when she grew up, she did something that the person in their adulthood did, and that they're apologizing to the perpetrator. They felt that it was their fault, and they're like, "I'm sorry this happened," and things like that. And they explained the state of mind, and they thought that they contributed to it somehow. They thought that they brought it upon themselves. Like, why would that happen to me? Is it because I did this? Is it because I did that? And it's interesting to see how, in some cases, when you're a victim of something, if you want to activate like your defense mechanism, you automatically say, okay, it's not that person's fault, it's my fault. And if I identify it as my fault, then I can do something about it because it's now my responsibility. Versus if Anna, you did something to me and I want it resolved, I need your participation in it. So it might be harder. What are some of the emotions that you experienced? Was there like some blame, some shame? Like, take us through what you were experiencing as you're looking back now because you were quite young going through it.
Yeah, there was definite an immediate shame, um, just uncomfortable feeling, confusion. There was absolute anger because I didn't understand why he would do that to me. What I a lot of for a long time, what did I do to cause that? Was something that ran through my mind because I did think that must have played a part in that. Um, I should have left it was in the locker area of in the downstairs area of our school. And I thought I shouldn't have been the last one to leave because I was the last one of the friend group. So everyone else had left and I hadn't left yet. And I thought if I had just left, I stayed alone. I shouldn't have been alone. So yeah, there was a lot of, I actually had this conversation this week about forgiveness. And I've had to do a lot of work of forgiving myself in that situation, how I responded in that situation, and that releasing myself from the responsibility that I thought I had. Um, yeah, I mean, probably every emotion you can think of, I have felt about that moment. Um, a lot of anger towards him that he can live a life. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what life he's living, but there is an anger sometimes of I now hold this, right? It's part of me. It's not all of me. It's part of my story. Is it part of his? Does he remember? Does he get to forget? Because I don't, and so there is some anger there that, hey, you've changed my life. And so, yeah, I think you can probably say I've had a lot of different emotions and some still come up.
What are some of the ways that, sorry, what are some of the things that you see that are commonalities in people that experience this type of trauma?
I think a lot of us feel shame. I think a lot of us feel shame. I think that's probably one of the biggest things is why we stay silent for so long. I think we feel a responsibility. I know that I specifically had a belief that I was bad, like very specific that I was bad, that situation proved I was not a good person. And I don't know if everybody else has that, but I know shame and that response, like I must have done something to cause it, when in fact that is the opposite, and you never caused it, and you're not a bad person. You didn't deserve that to happen to you. Um, those are the things that kind of help me now. But I think shame is something that is just extremely, extremely powerful, and can be debilitating.
Well, it's a feeling, and you also feel like powerless because someone has taken something from you that, in a lot of ways, are still very intimate and very sacred. And you mentioned your daughter, when she was approaching that age, you began to get feel triggered, and you're going through some of the emotions that maybe you experienced back then. Did you ever have the conversation with your daughter in an effort to maybe not only prepare herself but to help you along, because now you're in a way reliving what you went through?
Yes, yes. Our my children, in a very age appropriate way, we discuss things about people have the right to put their hands on you. We've had those discussions since they were little in an appropriate, age developmental way. Um, I did have a discussion with my daughter. I took her out to lunch one day, and I kind of they know what I do for a living. They know that I do the nonprofit. They're aware, but she wasn't specifically aware. And in a very appropriate way, I did talk to her about it, because she needs to know, right? Nobody wants to have a conversation with a 12-year-old child about being sexually assaulted, because our brains think that's crazy. I don't want to, they're children, right? Nobody wants to have that. But very unfortunately, children are being assaulted even at younger ages. So yes, it's a terrible thing, but I would rather equip her with empower her and let her know that if anything does ever happen, it is not your fault. You can yell and scream, you can hit, you can run. You can also stay silent if that's your choice. You can freeze if that's how what your body needs to do. Um, but that you have a safe place here with me. And at the end of the day, that's what I wanted her to know, that you always have a safe place to come with me, that you can tell me and I can help you. I'm here to help guide you through whatever life throws at us. And so, yeah, we did have that conversation. And I was very proactive with my own, therapies, and making sure that I checked in with myself and did those things that were important, because I didn't want to lay my traumas onto her. So yeah, it was very hard, to be honest. It was tough. It was tough. So but we got through it. So
Oh yeah, like I don't think that's on anyone's bingo card,
no,
that conversation.
no.
I spoke to a survivor, and she works with men and women who are overcoming it.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that she shared in our my conversation with her was there are times where we don't know that we're being assaulted until years later, because there's some people that are engaging in consensual activity, right? And then something happens. There's a change maybe in what's going on, or just a change in the dynamic, and now you're uncomfortable, but you're thinking, I love this person.
Mm-hmm.
This is my forever partner. This is my whatever it is you want to call them. And then what happens is you become more and more uncomfortable with their sexual demands, sexual requests. And I know that you work with a not-for-profit organization. When you're speaking to people, do you see that form of the assault where it's two people who are in a relationship together, but they're not necessarily okay with what is happening?
I have not had a student disclose that while in the nonprofit. I have had that when I was a school counselor. I have had students come to me who were in a consensual dating relationship, but very uncomfortable with where things were heading, uncomfortable with requests for pictures, right? That's so common now, and it's terrifying. But yes, that does happen. I know for me that did happen. That was almost exactly in high school. It just got, um, I didn't like it. I didn't like it, but I didn't know what to do, right? You're in this weird, you're a kid. It's so difficult. And sometimes we kind of go along with it, not realizing it. This is abuse. Like, this is not okay. But we don't know it for a very, very long time afterward.
I think that's the part that's scary, because as children, even as adults, we're not fully equipped, right? But as children, it's tough, and they're more likely to give into the peer pressure. Come on, just send me a picture of this, send me a picture of that. It's like now there's so many, it's become, I think, commonplace. Like I hear from my friends, male and female, that they're exchanging pictures of body parts like it's nothing.
Mhm, mhm.
And
It's extraordinarily, I will use the word common. A lot of kids would say, "Oh, everyone does it," and I was like, "Okay, just because everyone does it does not mean it is appropriate and okay and healthy. Period." Right? They like to use that everyone's doing it, but it is happening a lot, and unfortunately, a lot of times when people think it's going to be, just sent to one person, it is then sent out or posted online, and I mean that destroys somebody. That is humiliating and such a violation. It's very difficult for them to come back from that when it's just been spread out on social media and stuff. So yeah, I'm very happy. I'm old lady, and we didn't have cell phones back then. We didn't have any of that. We barely had beepers. We had beepers, so, but it's I keep a close eye on phones. If I were, I mean, I am a teen. My daughter has a phone. There's a lot of stuff that I'm in charge of the phone, um, and I monitor it just because kids send things and do things that they shouldn't. And I think we need to be very aware of that. You're a parent of a teen.
yeah, you don't want to be, I guess you need to find that balance. You don't become like what they call it, the helicopter parents,
Hmm.
where you're just circling everything that they do. But you have to be protective in the sense that it is so dangerous. Like I couldn't imagine, like I find the courage because I don't normally do it, right? I find the courage to send like a racy picture, an explicit picture of myself, and then things end and that ends up on the internet. Like how do you recover from that, right? Like you're like you're that guy.
Right,
You're that
right,
girl,
right,
right? And
right. But
you see people like who experience, let's say, who self-delete, who unalive themselves, who commit suicide because of these things, because the
yep.
pressure is so overwhelming. And I wouldn't want to, because you and I are like relative around the same age. Like when we're in school, the person who was, let's say, promiscuous or who was known to be, you knew essentially who they were, right? Like they could be identified. Now we identify people in a different way. Like, oh my God, that's Anna. She sent these pictures to Terrain. You want to see them? And then you can just literally log in somewhere and see it. And that carries forward from the age of 12, the age of 16, the age
Hmm.
of 20, the age of 25. I remember speaking to a teacher, and she teaches, I think, grade 5 or 6, which is like what, you're like 11, around that age,
Yeah.
right? And she was telling me that people in her class are sexually active. I was like, how? I could literally blew my mind. Like, are you surprised of how sexually active or at least sexually engaged the younger generation is, which opens themselves up to these potential dangers?
I have to be honest, when being a school counselor for high school kids, the things that they've told me, I'm not surprised that it's happening younger, because when I worked with students who were from 14 to 18, the things that they would tell me horrified me. The things that they were doing was just terrible. So it doesn't surprise me that it's younger and younger. And I think the access to information that they should not